Welcome back to Life in Review. I'm Josefa Salinas, your host. Well, because we're an old school station, everybody loves old school. We're especially fond of the 90s. It happens to be my favorite decade because to me, there's nothing like the life that we had here in Los Angeles in the 90s. But life was going on all over the world. Clubs were like just the heart of so many cities. It actually started, I guess, really strong in the 70s and then in the 80s. But I tell you, there's nothing like the 90s. But there's somebody that really has, I think, an inside, back behind the curtain, the Wizard of Oz kind of look at what was really happening, how it all started, how it all changed, and then how it changed our world. The Club King is the book, My Rise, Reign, and Fall in the New York Nightlife. Peter Gatien is with us. Did I say it right, Peter Gatien?
Yeah, you're pronouncing it perfectly.
Oh, good. All right, Peter. Well, it's wonderful to have you here. I tell you, the book is amazing. I read it, and now I'm giving it to my son, who's 23, for him to read it because, he always says, "Oh, Mom, you always talk about the 90s. You always talk about the 90s. What was so great about the 90s?" And I said, "Oh, babe, I tell you, it would take me hours and hours and stories." He goes, "Well, I already know so many of the stories." I said, "Yeah, but there's so many more."
Right.
Because it was just a different time. So, Peter, let's talk a little bit about you're the king, the club king. How did you even get the idea to start that first club, and when was it?
First club I did was in 1972-ish. It was in my little hometown. I come from a small industrial town in Canada, 40,000 people, big paper mill. And basically, I got in the clothing business selling jeans. I was young. I was 17, and it just wasn't for me. So anyway, a dilapidated country and western place became available, aggressively pursued it, and I opened a place. Actually, the first place was called the Aardvark, and my first act was Rush. And that's when Rush, were basically nobodies. I remember paying them $1,000 a week. We used to get bands from Toronto come down for, basically the budget was $1,000 a week. So, I got into it. I guess, from my time of growing up in a small town, my parents' Christmas holidays or weddings were the only time I saw those people actually enjoy life, sing and dance and whatever. And I don't know if that was implanted deep in my mind that, geez, it would be great to be able to do this for a living, make people happy. And, I think that was sort of ingrained in me. I wasn't particularly scholastically inclined. My older brother, older brothers were only a year apart. One's a doctor, one's a lawyer, the other ones are teachers or whatever. And it was just that was something that always interested me. And I was going to, want to get into business, I guess. And I just, I went after it. It didn't fall in my lap, but, seemed to come natural to me. I'm a good shepherd of talent. I'm not particularly talented myself, but I'm a good shepherd of talent. And that's what I've been doing for, did it for the 30 years I was in nightclub. Several talented people and put together, a production that people never forget about.
Oh, most definitely. They'll never forget about it. I mean, people talk about the 70s. They talk about the 80s. I never made it to the New York East Coast lifestyle and party times because I was in high school, then in college in the 80s. So by the time I got to L.A. in the 90s, there were so many different clubs. It was a whole scene was changing, but then there was also the big political change. I remember I worked at Power 106, which is a big hip-hop station at the time. And there were people protesting out front with signs and wanting to bring the station down. And it was a political change at that time in the 90s that affected club life and music and the culture.
Yeah, and not only with the hip hop community. You mentioned people protesting. Hip hop when we first started, wasn't even making it to the radio stations much. And the same thing with LBGT. You call it rights or acceptance or tolerance or whatever. In those years, I really take a lot of pride and gratification that we provided sanctuaries for these people to come in and express themselves and have a good time and feel safe. And more importantly, that we mixed them with other people. It wasn't like all my crowd on one night was 100% gay or whatever. We put a lot of energy in creating nights, whether it was through book parties, fashion events, whatever, to draw different elements of New York. And then doing it in New York is so great because everybody is so, every demographic, everything is so well represented there. And, we achieved, tried to be a microcosm of New York. We didn't want everybody to look the same that was in the club. And, that formula, worked for a lot of years until Rudy Giuliani came around.
Oh, yes. Good old Rudy.
But the other thing also, And you understand also, there was no social media around back then. So if you wanted to know what people were wearing or what music, was going to be on the radio in 3 months or 6 months, you want to be a little bit avant-garde, a little bit, you had to go out. You had to meet people. You had to press flesh. People didn't even have cell phones back then. So, I mean, it's really often considered the golden age of nightclubs, and one of the reasons, like I said, is there was no social media. I mean, we were the social media back then. Art, fashion, music, all that stuff emanated out of clubs or nightlife, and now, like I said, a lot of that's been replaced with social media. You can find like-minded people that sit in your basement and just going on whatever app that is appropriate for it. Different times. You'll never see it again.
Yeah, and there's a line, a paragraph in the book here. It says, the heyday of the digital age changed everything. Before cell phones and Facebook and Instagram, before the web went worldwide, in order to find out what was happening, everybody had to get up off the couch and physically present themselves in public to discover what people were wearing, what they were listening to, what was hot and hip and cool. You had to get out and press the flesh. And I could not agree with you more on that one. The big clubs then were Limelight, Tunnel, Club USA, and Palladium in New York. We had a Palladium here as well, but we ran into a lot of problems in the early 90s with the Palladium here that caused it to be closed down. I mean, I went to the Palladium a few times and saw some great shows, as well as Glam Slam, which was Prince's club in the 90s. I remember one time we had George Clinton came and performed and did a 45-minute version of One Nation Under the Groove. The song went on for 45 minutes. I mean, those are the shows that you saw then.
And you'll never forget that night.
Yeah, well, we don't see shows like that anymore. There's nowhere to see shows like those, to see artists, to see up-and-coming people, to see, Tupac in a lime green leather coat in 91 at a venue down in Irvine to become one of the biggest hip-hop artists a few years later. I mean, you just don't see that anymore. What do you think? Why has club life gone away?
For some reason, I don't know why, but it evolved into, in the late 90s, it evolved into like sort of the bottle service aspect. And customers were prized more on how much they could spend that night, whether they could buy a table for crazy money, $500, $1,000, $1,500, whatever the case may be. In our day, it was much more. Our concept was much more egalitarian. Like we put in so much energy to drawing a diverse crowd. Feeling that in the end the crowd is what entertains each other besides the music and the music, lights and everything else. But it's really important to get everybody to sort of under the same roof with different styles and different tastes and different backgrounds and different aspirations in life and whatever, and really produce magic that you don't see anymore. Clubs today are, I won't name anyone by name, but like I said, you're only important if you can pull up in a limousine or a Lamborghini or whatever and go in and blow $10,000. Where in our days, like if you put a little effort into your outfit, whether it's a piece of sequence or something, you're contributing. We value customers on what you can contribute to the party and the atmosphere and the craziness of the night, and not like how much could you spend. It isn't like. In fact, you have a better shot of getting in their clubs if you have a couple of interesting tattoos, or you just have a little sense of style or that kind of stuff. You have a much better chance of getting in and pulling up and showboating in a limousine or whatever. We value customers on what they can contribute culturally to the night and not financially to the night.
Talk to me about your legendary Sunday night hip-hop parties.
Okay, like all our nights, whether it was Rock and Roll Church or Pearl Jam and Guns N' Roses and whatever played, everything started organically and sort of at smaller and local talent level, and then organically that night got to the point where artists like Jay-Z or Puffy or Nas or whatever recognized that there was something really special going on here. And all those people performed, and this, not all of them in the book, but a lot of them, all performed, and when I say all, including Jay-Z, whatever, performed for free. They realized that night really was special, and if they got acceptance from that crowd on whatever the album that they were planning on dropping in a week's time or new tracks that they were testing or whatever, that crowd was was urban, and it had strong ideas on direction of hip hop and what pleased him or whatever. So it was like, I'm right now. I'm working on a documentary with Sasha Jenkins, who just directed the Wu-Tang 4-part series and got an Emmy nomination for it. But he explained. He said, and I didn't even look at it. I said, Peter, you understand? This was to the black community or the urban community or the hip hop community. This was like Ed Sullivan show, and I don't remember the Ed Sullivan show where he basically introduced the Beatles and he introduced the Doors and whatever. To the hip-hop community, if you had your name on a flyer, in fact, I just did an interview with a DJ that has a huge, series. So, he had his name on a flyer a couple of times for Tunnel Sundays, and he said, you have no idea what that did for my career, and within the community or whatever. Like, you gained so much credibility if you were, one of the people that performed at Tunnel Sundays. We had a 9-year run on that night, and I took a lot of grief from authorities for that night, even though I didn't deserve it, and we were in an isolated part of town that really didn't bother any community. But still today, the influence of hip hop, the way we talk, the way we walk, the way we dress, the music we listen to is still like the main influence in culture, today. And it started at it didn't start at the Tunnel. The Tunnel, in fact, Vibe magazine credited us in '96 of being the springboard of mainstreaming hip hop in America. It was that strong an influence. Every record exec was there on Sundays, making deals, people exchanging tapes or whatever. It was a great night, and that's why we're doing a documentary on it.
Yeah, and it really wasn't that long ago when you think about it. The mid 90s was only maybe 24, 25 years ago. So when you're
it's not it's not 100 years ago. And again, like I say, the influence of hip hop is indisputable. I mean, it's still there today, and started somewhere. And then we were definitely on the ground floor. I'm not saying we started, but we were on the ground floor.
Absolutely.
Basically, hip hop influence, whether it's a club kid influence, whether it's gay influence, whether it's rock and roll church or whatever, we were the place to go for the wide demographics of New York City. I mean, we tried to be a microcosm of the city, and we tried to cater to every different cultural aspect of the city. And we worked hard at it.
How did you know when a club wasn't going to work? What were the signs that a club was probably not, that wasn't the right idea?
Well, I thank God, knock on wood, whatever, I never experienced that. Every one of my clubs, whether they were in New York or the other cities, had really, great runs, and whether the ones I did in London and Chicago were bought by other people who continued to run nightclubs into those spaces. Listen, don't get me wrong. There are times that were lean, like '85 when the AIDS epidemic hit New York. That's when I did the club in London and the club in Chicago. Basically, AIDS was predominantly a really big issue for New York and for San Francisco, but the rest of the country was, I'm not going to say they were spared, but they weren't near as hard as New York. But it wasn't so much. Listen, I always say, you come to be gilded in gold or whatever, and in the end, it's the crowds that you draw that make it institutional and memorable and whatever else. So it wasn't like this is a bad idea, I shouldn't have done it. It's just that you have to cater to the your audience being the market you're in, and if you're smart, especially in large markets, you can carve your niche. But nothing comes easy. It's always competitive out there. But you basically, if you're clever, you can carve your niche in large markets, and you can make a mark. And I think my organization, did.
A lot of the artists back in the day, I remember because I was working with a lot of artists in the mid 90s, they would go to a club and perform, like you said, because it was like the place to be. Everybody was there, and you wanted to go and you wanted to perform there. Nowadays, you've got kids that haven't even had a record out, and they want to be paid just to get up on stage.
What I find even more offensive, and in the book I don't list any near the celebrities that went through there, but never in my life, or my club life or whatever, have we ever considered paying a celebrity just to show up. Like that's just like unfathomable to me. It just I can't even think of that concept. Where now, like I said, a lot of the artists, they want $5,000, $10,000 just to go, not to perform or anything like that. It's it's a different world now. Like I said, it's just like we never did that, never had to do it. We I guess got believe that, if we put together a wonderful product, celebrities who have a choice of going anywhere they want will choose your place because you're offering, a better mousetrap, better environment, a better night. That's where all the energy was put in. I mean, nobody ever came to the clubs, my clubs, and we did in those 2 decades. Nobody ever came to my clubs because they wanted to hang out with Peter Gatien or whatever. They came because my organization put together an event that was mind-blowing on night after night after night, and they knew we're going to have a good time at my venues. That's the long and the short of it.
I know. I feel sorry for my son's generation now because I tell him there were so many different venues, so many different clubs to go to. No matter what kind of music you wanted, you could find somewhere that it was going to be happening. And there were people to go and see. And certain Saturday nights you would be over here, or other nights you'd be at Glam Slam, or you'd be over there. I mean, there was always something going on somewhere, and it doesn't exist anymore.
Yeah, and not only that, but you had to check it out yourself. Like, you understand there was no Twitter back then. Somebody could go to Limelight and say, Limelight's rocking tonight, or Limelight's dead, don't come by, or whatever. There was not even cell phones. So you had to go out and see it for yourself what was happening. There was no, tools to make it, easier or whatever. You actually had to circulate, which was great. Different time.
It was definitely a different time, and if you want to know all about it, The Club King is the book, My Rise, Reign, and Fall in New York Nightlife by Peter Gatien. Peter, give us some social media where people can find out more about you, the book, and all the exciting things you have coming.
Yeah, just go on to Amazon.com, Club King, Peter Gatien, and then it's all there. It tells you how to get it, whether you want an audio, whether you want a hardcover or paperback. It's happy to say it's doing really well.
Well, yeah, I can imagine why, because I tell you, there's nothing like, for me, the decade of the 90s, and this book definitely is a reflection of several decades, but my favorite one, the 90s as well. And when you got your new projects are coming up, please come back and see us. We'd love to hear all about it and actually see the visuals of the Club King's life.
Thanks, Josefa. And it was a real pleasure, and we'll definitely cross paths again.
All right, Peter, have an amazing day. Stay safe.
Okay, you too. Okay, bye-bye.
What a great morning it has been. We talked about disabled veterans and how to help them get services. Should you buy real estate in this current market? Telemedicine, what is it and where is it going? We gave you the current COVID updates. Remember, you can go to lbunited.com to get all those updates. And then the Club King. Were you able to go to clubs in the 90s? Do you remember how much fun that was? I'm Josefa Salinas. Until we get together again, stay strong, stay focused. Most of all, stay informed. I'll catch you next time right here. Have an amazing week. Try to take good care of yourself. Make sure you look at all your options when you're trying to decide how you and your family are going to move forward in the coming weeks. I'll see you soon.